We've got a wealth of knowledge at the university, and certainly around climate change. We've got some of the best scientists in the world at the university, but we equally want to understand what's important to local people and draw on their own experiences, because they're the ones that are living along that estuary and know what the impacts are.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast of Socially Engaged Universities. In this podcast, we travel past 5 European cities, stopping at Exeter, Parma, Ghent, Magdeburg and Delft. All of these cities are part of a network that has studied for the last 2 years ways in which knowledge institutions can have more societal impact, next of course to teaching and researching. How can they really become part of the community and add to the questions that are important for the community itself? But also, they didn't only study how you could do that, they also got to work and piloted new ways to engage in societal projects.
Good morning. Today my colleague Stephanie Schuddebeers and I, some paper, both from the University of Applied Science, talk to people from Exeter. And I would like to give Stephanie the word.
Yeah, today we don't really visit so much as a city, as a river. So that's a new thing on our podcast. I'm really excited about that. The Ex, as it's called, has given its name to many small villages along its course, including the city of Exeter. It flows through the county of Somerset and Devon, and if you picture England, it's all on the way in the south, on the left, I would say, or other people would say it's the west, and it ends up in the Channel. So, joining us today are Anne-Marie Colijn and Joe Salter. They are two creative artists who have also a track record in designing participatory spaces using artistic expression. Also with us today is Lindsay Anderson, working for the University of Exeter as an Impact and Partnership Development Manager. A very warm welcome to the three of you on the other side of the Channel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So last year you've been working on this project together in which you've explored creative techniques to invite the community living along and working along the Ex estuary to express their relationship to the river. And you've done much more than that. But before we dive into the project itself, could you please describe this river for us? Where are we? How does it look like? Is it big? Is it very... what's going on there? Who uses it?
Well, it's an estuary. The focus of the project is around the estuary. The estuary is, I think, about a mile and a half wide and 6 to 7 miles long.
Sorry, Joe, but an estuary for me as a non-native speaker is a bit of a...
Oh, estuary?
A question mark.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. An estuary is defined by it being intertidal. That's to say the tide's reach is in the centre of Exeter, which is 7 miles from the coast. And in between it is the estuary, but it's closed at the top, you might say, by the narrowness of when it becomes a river in Exeter.
Right.
And it's also nearly closed when it exits into the sea at Exmouth, as in mouth. Okay. So there's a vast amount of water that passes in between every day, twice a day, up to Exeter and back, filling the whole basin and back out again. All of this water passes through the narrows or the straits at Exmouth. So the focus is on that vulnerable and fascinating ecosystem that is basically there for all the species and the people that live in it and around it.
So it's the seawater flowing in, but also reaching probably the river water, which I reckon is sweet. So it's brack water.
It's fresh water. I think the word you're looking for is brackish, which is. But yes, it mixes, and so the nature of the two kinds of water mixing is an important part of how it flows, and also how the species experience it and feed off it.
So we have either side of the estuary, we have little villages, except Exmouth is the biggest settlement on the estuary, which is right on the coast and on the estuary, so it's on the corner. And that's about 55,000 people. It's the fourth biggest town in Devon.
Right.
And then the rest of the settlements are villages all the way up to Exeter, which is a big city. And what's really interesting is that in a way, at the moment, the estuary divides people. So we can see across the other side to the other settlements, but there's very little exchange or communication between those. We just have one little ferry that runs in the summer, and otherwise you have to drive a long way around to get to the other side.
And I guess it's used for recreational purposes a lot, or also businesses make use of it. So how does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of recreational use with boats and paddleboarders and kayakers, and now more and more sea swimmers and river swimmers. And also we have a long history of aquaculture, which means particularly mussel farming, and also some oyster beds as well.
Okay. And are you also living in one of those villages around the estuary yourself? So can you see the river or the bedding from your houses, or not so much?
Well, Exmouth is a large town, and we could probably see it. We can see the other side of the river from the top floor window. That's the best I can say. But you can smell the sea, and seagulls nest on our roof.
Oh yeah, yep, I get the picture. Can you tell us about the main aim of this project called Tidelines that you initiated?
Yeah, so we were working with the SEU in our pilot year, and this worked really well for us because we'd already done about a year and a half of research, so we were ready to go. So the timing was fantastic, and our project Tidelines was looking at how we can explore really creative approaches to engaging the communities around the estuary that we've talked about, and how we might create a hub, a really exciting, learning, creative, exploratory hub focused on the Ex and the estuary in order to protect it, care for it better, really understand it more, and look at how it might be changing in the future and how it might also shape our futures as it changes.
And why did you think this was so important? And what drew you to this project of creating a hub?
It's a missing item, if you like, on the estuary. It's the estuary doesn't have any specific focus in the community. It's quite disparate, the community, in the sense of how we perceive the estuary. So in a sense, we all relate to it. We all live around it. We can't avoid it. We travel along it, and we play on it. So, but there's no cohesive understanding of it, and there is a need for it to come from the community, because the other institutions that exist are more about businesses and management. But the community doesn't have a particular input into that, and I think perhaps that's part of the motivation for that.
Yeah, and it is changing a lot, and it is suffering in terms of how the climate and ecology are being impacted by human interference and human impact. So we want to pay attention to what's happening and to be aware of how, for example, sea level rise might impact all the people that live around its edges, and also how changing ocean chemistry might be impacting all the biodiversity that give it such a unique character and are so important here and have been so important in the past. So we really want to let it speak to us again as people that live around it.
Lindsay, I was wondering, from a university perspective, what made you engage in this project together with Anne-Marie and Joe?
I think from our point of view, the Socially Engaged Universities project was all about the university working with the community on a community-led project, and this was just the perfect opportunity for us to do that, because Anne-Marie and Joe were already working in the area of Exmouth. They were already very, very embedded in Exmouth as a town and a community, and what they were doing here was trying to bring people together in a very inclusive way, listen to people about their thoughts and their ideas and their concerns about the river. And that just seemed to chime really, really well with what we were trying to do in the Socially Engaged Universities project. So for me, it was a perfect opportunity for us to work with them. And I've got a personal connection as well. I live in one of those small villages along the Exe. I can see the Exe from my window, my office window. My children play on the Exe, they paddleboard on the Exe, and it's always been very important in our lives. And this was just a really nice opportunity for us to work on a project that was trying to bring all these elements together and enabled the university to work with the community on something that was important to them.
And I understood you really took a creative approach, an artistic approach even. Can you explain a bit, what does that look like, a creative participatory approach?
I think the main element in the creative approach is to make it, is to think differently, is to create a space where people feel safe to have discussions. It's to create a dialogue, and in order to do that, it needs to be creating that space is done through a variety of means. This could be done through the juxtaposition of different activities that you might not expect. So the creating of an event that takes place in an unusual place, that takes people perhaps out of their initial comfort zone into a place where they're open to surprises, open to new ideas. It can be done through visuals, through graphic design, through, I'm saying, what else?
Well, activity, so I think when we quite often have this challenge in the kind of work that we do as artists, because it's not about making a picture or producing a play. It's about the whole way of thinking creatively rather than the output of a particular thing that then becomes an object. So it's about trying to put people into a creative space of thinking and opening up possible different ways of using your imagination or reflecting on your own life creatively. So one of the ways we did that was through a thing called the Estuary box, which was very beautifully designed. So the whole thing is like a little gift that you get given. So it's a little box which is sort of screen printed and has within it different objects and activities that you can take part in, but they're not printed on A4 in black and white. They're very carefully designed, so we're creating a space where somebody feels like it's something quite special, that they're being invited to share their thoughts in. So in that pack there was an opportunity to make your own personal map of the estuary. So we invited people to say, how do you forget about Ordnance Survey maps or Google Maps, what is the estuary to you and how do you picture it and experience it? And that map could be through smells, through activities or personal memories. It could be how strange stories of things that have happened to you over time on the Exe, the fish that you've caught. What's your personal take on that? And in that we've probably got, 80, 100 maps from people which give a totally different perspective on the estuary. So that's just an example of how we try and open up a kind of personalised creative space. Some people have just done pencil drawing sketches. Some people some people have embroidered maps or created etched maps. So people take that in any way they want, and there's no judgment on or hierarchy of better or worse. It's just this is different people's perspectives.
I also read about the swimming that happened more during the lockdown because people were all out and they all had to sort of put their energy out there. And you also addressed this, like swimming in the sea and what it entails.
Yeah, we did an event in summer last July, which was about sea temperature change. So I made an artwork looking at the last 10 years of sea temperature using data from a local buoy that's collecting data. And buoy as in floating buoy, not a boy.
I was okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, I was already seeing this small boy every day going to the
10 years. Yeah, yeah. And So then we thought, oh gosh, sea temperature. Everyone's talking about the sea temperature. It's really warm this year. Everyone's swimming, and every swimmer in this country says, oh, it's cold today, or it's the key topic of conversation for sea swimmers. So we wanted to, take advantage of that and say, okay, so let's talk about sea temperature. How's it changing? Is that linked to climate change? Can we bring some experts together, to local people, to talk about how that's changing in our estuary?
Lindsay, from a university perspective, what made this project innovative in how the university usually works together with community?
Yeah, well, I think the University of Exeter is increasingly realising the importance of working with communities and just more broadly stakeholders. And I think a lot of our researchers are generally realising that their research is much richer and more relevant if we work with the end user of the research. And this is something that's happening increasingly, working with stakeholders through all stages of the research cycle, from designing the research question, designing the research project, and working through the whole project itself. What was different here with the SEU Tidelines collaboration was that it took this to the next level, and it was really unique in the fact that the university employed Anne-Marie and Joe, who were already living and working within the community that we were going to be working with. They were really embedded there, and had been working with communities for a number of months already. And because it really takes a place-based approach, so we were trying to work with this community around the topic of the ex-estuary, but trying to use that as a basis for thinking about climate change and how that was impacting upon people who lived and worked along the estuary. And I think because Anne-Marie and Joe were so embedded in the community already, that really helped us. So yeah, I think for us it was certainly a new approach, and one that I hope that we'd be replicating again.
And can you explain for the listener, what results do you reap from engaging in a community artist engagement process like this? So from academic perspective, what if I'm a university? I think that's really beautiful, but how does it flow back into the university?
Yeah, really good question. Well, I think, first of all, we're trying to understand what that does mean. And I think certainly Anne-Marie and Joe have worked with a number of academics along the way, and engaged with quite a number of different academics, and they can speak more effectively than I can. But academics from both the University of Exeter and the University of Plymouth, both creative arts students, but also bioscientists, people who are engaged in the environment. So out of the engagements that Anne-Marie and Joe did over the last 12 months, a number of research questions did emerge, and two of those questions at the moment are being worked upon by some of our master's students. We've got a master's programme called Global Sustainability Solutions, and this master's takes a very engaged approach to the research, and two of those students are actually looking at those questions. Anne-Marie and Joe, I don't know whether you can remind me what those students are working on.
Yeah, we asked them if they would be interested in looking at sea level change, so finding really clear ways of showing sea level rise information to public. So that information might already exist within the academic realm, but somebody from outside would look at it and it would either be lots of numbers or be a diagram that needed lots of explanation. So we have a student looking at that, and we also have a student looking at seagrass. So seagrass is something we have in our estuary but is diminished, and so she's looking at the current seagrass resource and how we might be able to increase that in the future, which will support all sorts of biodiversity in our estuary and also captures carbon. So we're also drawing from that whole kind of year of talking to lots of people and getting lots of feedback from people. We now kind of have a sense of what feels important to some of those groups. So we are now embarking on the next stage of co-designing a project with academics, the community and local environmental groups and NGO, we call them non-government organisations. We're going to have a workshop day with them to co-design a project around water quality in the estuary, which will involve hands-on citizen science and creative engagement in how we, and also maybe policy, looking at how that citizen engagement might affect policy.
It's recognising that lived knowledge or experiential knowledge is as important as the expert knowledge at the university. We've got a wealth of knowledge at the university, and certainly around climate change. We've got some of the best scientists in the world at the university, but we equally want to understand what's important to local people and draw on their own experiences, because they're the ones that are living along that estuary and know what the impacts are.
And was this the first time that you worked with students in this project along the estuary, or were there other projects in the community already where students were involved?
To my knowledge, this is probably the first of this type. Students are involved in many projects and community-based projects, but to my knowledge, this is the first specific project that involved students in this way.
I was wondering, since you've been working together from university and community perspectives, what lessons can you draw on cooperation that might also be interesting to other listeners wanting to set up a project like this? This is for both of you, actually, because I think you have different perspectives.
Well, from my point of view, having Anne-Marie and Joe, who were really, they were familiar with the region, they spoke the language, they acted like brokers, effectively, between the community and the university. And I think this was really, really important and incredibly useful within this project. They worked in a very organic way, so they as well as understanding the estuary, they've got this beautiful creativity that I certainly lack, and I think that really helped them reach out to all walks of life. So they were able to include everybody. That meant that everybody felt equal and felt that they had an equal voice in the project. And I think this probably just made the project more inclusive, and I think that was a really impactful thing to do.
Yeah, what was brilliant for us is that having Lindsay in her particular role has been really valuable for us, and I guess we would love to have that continued link with the university, which has now fallen away because our funding's end. So that's something in our wish list, is that role was something that we could have as an ongoing, because we still want to work in this way, and we're still working with the university. We're just missing Lindsay.
And I think this is a problem of the short-term funding, and this is something that we often discuss, is the fact that short-term funding is really useful to get projects like this established, but then it's the continuity, it's how to keep those links and make it sustainable. So that's always a problem with this sort of project.
Yeah, so that sounds like a big challenge. Yeah, sorry, Anne-Marie, do you?
Yeah, we were just, I guess, as a small organisation without huge resources, some of the bureaucracy around the university and the systems that we had to learn, new systems for getting, even just expenses approved would sometimes take a long time, and that was a little bit tricky for us to get our heads around just for a year project. That took a lot of time, and some of the language and the terminology that's used in the academic world is also quite difficult. So we have an advisory group, which is community, university, and us. And sometimes the language there, I know, was difficult for people to understand.
Yeah. No, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think, as academics in an academic world, we forget that not everybody speaks the same language. And it's not necessarily about the level of complexity, it's just a different terms of phrases.
We also were wondering what surprised you during this project. I mean, you set off and then you embark on this journey, and then lots of things happens. I mean, the pandemic probably a big part of that. Can you share on that?
Yeah, I think obviously the project got off to a great start back in January 2020. Anne-Marie and Joe designed a fantastic array of events that were going to be taking place face to face. And then, of course, in March 2020, COVID hit, and I honestly thought that we were going to have to just cancel the project. There was a time when I really thought, well, how can you do community engagement without being able to meet face to face? But it was great. I've got to say, Anne-Marie and Joe dealt with this really, really fantastically. They stepped back, they reconsidered the approach. They decided to divert all their resources and time initially to providing the website. And they redesigned a lot of the activities so that they could have been done online via the website. And this just worked really well. And I think this helped them reach out to a broader number of people. So I think the reach possibly, and we have discussed this, the reach possibly was greater by engaging through the website and social media than it might have been if it had been face to face. I'm not suggesting that it was as rich or as nuanced as it might have been if it had been face to face, but I think, you know, it did enable them to reach out to a larger number of people, and I think that created a really nice community of interest. And I couldn't have imagined this at the beginning of last year. I couldn't have imagined this, but they made it happen, and they did it really, really well. And yeah, I think it was fantastic. So that was my greatest surprise.
Joe, what surprised you during this project?
I was surprised by the willingness and keenness of academics and scientists to get involved, which I can completely understand, except that people don't usually have the time. And the community didn't surprise me particularly, in that I always thought the community was a difficult creature.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there are so many other approaches to communities. Communities can be quite defensive. There are so many different interests, and they clash. And people tend to, incorrectly think of the community as being focused on some local authority or some central item where everybody argues. And it's very much our job to sidestep all of that. And that's not an easy thing to do, but we've done a lot of it in the past. So it's one important point about that actually is that it takes time. The one thing we've learned over the years really is that you need to give these things time, because trust doesn't come straight away. I mean, it's common sense, but it can't be overemphasized.
And I think from the university's point of view, I think that is one of our aims, is to work collaboratively and not just to parachute in with some of our academics telling the community that this is what must happen. We're trying to understand from the community's point of view how they feel that they would like to be supported, and then if we can do that together by identifying a common cause and getting our academics and our students to work alongside the community to co-create research that helps them respond to any issues that they've identified, that would be a really positive outcome.
How will this project actually continue?
So we have as we said before, we have a project which is emerging from this initial pilot, which is around a community university research project around water quality, and we're fairly confident that we will be able to find funding for that. So that's absolutely the next stage that we were heading towards, and we're really excited about the possibilities for that. We are also already had some support for our high water project, which celebrates and marks the highest tide and is an international event, which one of the surprises was that went incredibly well and attracted interest from all around the world to our estuary, and we've already got support from the museum in Exeter and the University of Exeter to support that for next year, so they're already asked us to do that again.
Yep.
So,
and what would you say was the main outcome of this project?
Well, a very large audience and base. The community participation has grown enormously, which gives us the chance to continue with that. You could also say, in every direction, community, arts and sciences, we've grown a kind of base of an interest group from each of those that will stand us in good stead for the future. That's the biggest achievement of this year, really, I think. which has turned out to be completely different from what we expected. So we're in a very different place now than we probably thought we would have been before lockdown.
Yeah, I think it's been hugely important. I think that for me, I think the process has been really important, and that's been a really important outcome that we've tried and tested a totally different approach to community engagement, and I think we'll. As a university, learn an awful lot from this, and hopefully we'll find ways to continue working with Tidelines. And I'm really hopeful that we'll have students and academics working on projects that have been identified by the community participants of Tidelines for many years to come. But also, I think this approach is one that we'll hope to replicate elsewhere with different communities and possibly different societal issues. But it's been a really great project to work on, and I've really, really enjoyed working with them.
And so did we.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, Anna-Marie, Joe and Lindsay, we really want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
To elaborate on this very interesting project. And we really hope that we hear from you in the future and that it will develop as you wish.
Thank you very much.
And it was, I also really enjoyed the seagulls in the background. I think they came from Anne-Marie and Joe. That gave us a local touch.
Lovely.
Thanks so much. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.